Imagine you are standing on the bank of the Tiber, in the very heart of the most powerful and influential civilization in human history. Today, we are talking about ancient Rome. How did it arise? What was its peak? And why did Rome become so powerful? My dear friends, welcome to official channel Midnight Lecture, a place where night becomes a doorway to forgotten worlds, and a single voice carries you gently into the depths of history. Tonight, we open the gates of one of the greatest civilizations ever to walk this earth, a civilization of marble and fire, glory and blood, brilliance and tragedy. Tonight, we speak of ancient Rome. Make yourself comfortable. Let the night embrace you, and let your mind drift into an age where ambition shaped nations and destiny was written with the stroke of a sword. If you enjoy drifting off to these stories, to this calm voice, this careful research, and this quiet journey through time, support our path. Subscribe to the channel, tap the bell, and leave a few warm words in the comments below. Tonight, we travel to Rome, not to watch history, but to feel it. The Apennine Peninsula is washed by the Ionian Sea from the south and the Adriatic Sea from the east. It has a climate favorable for agriculture and livestock, rich pastures and fertile lands. Its geographical position contributed to the early and active development of seafaring among the many tribes that inhabited the peninsula. In the first millennium BCE, the Apennine Peninsula was populated by various peoples who were at different stages of socio-economic development. The northwest of the peninsula was inhabited by the Etruscans. It is assumed that they came to Italy from Asia Minor. By the 6th century BCE, 12 of the largest Etruscan city-states formed a union headed by annually elected rulers, a king and a high priest. This union extended its influence over most of northern and central Italy. Under the influence of the Greeks, the Etruscans developed an original and highly advanced culture. Already in the 6th century BCE, they possessed writing and used a version of the Greek alphabet. Etruscan influence was very noticeable in the early period of Roman history. Etruscan cities were a model for the Romans in matters of state organization and military structure, as well as in applied arts and construction. The Romans inherited from them a number of political and religious institutions. Another people who had a major influence on the emergence of the Roman state were the Greeks. The developed cultural and political traditions of the Greeks became an example for the native inhabitants of the peninsula. The central part of Italy was inhabited by Latin tribes. In the first millennium BCE, the kin tribal system among the Latins began to break down, and the first cities appeared. Around the middle of the first millennium BCE, several related Latin communities on the banks of the Tiber united into a single political entity, the city of Rome. In essence, this union marked the beginning of the formation of the Roman civic community, a political structure typologically similar to the Greek polis. According to legend, Rome was founded by the brothers Romulus and Remus. The first of them became the first king of Rome. Tradition says that after Romulus, 6 more kings ruled Rome: Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. The last 3 kings were of Etruscan origin, which gives grounds to suppose that in the 6th century BCE, Rome fell under strong Etruscan influence. The power of the king was initially close to that of a tribal chief. The king acted as military commander and high priest, but his real influence on Rome's internal political life was significantly limited by the Council of Elders and the popular assemblies. During the reign of the Etruscan dynasty, however, the Roman kings began to claim more and more power. The reign of the first 2 kings, Romulus and Numa, was of special importance for the formation of the Roman community. Romulus is credited with creating the entire social and military structure of the community. He divided the Romans into 30 curiae, formed 3 tribes, and distinguished between patricians and plebeians. He also formed the infantry and cavalry of the early Roman army. The second king, Numa Pompilius, laid the foundations of the religious and economic life of the Roman community. Under him, the most important colleges of priests were created. A calendar was established, and many temples were built, the most famous of which was the Temple of Janus. Tullus Hostilius, the third king, according to tradition, engaged in expanding Roman territory and waging wars with neighboring communities. Ancus Marcius strengthened Rome's position on the Tiber and at its mouth, towards the Etruscan shore. Starting with the 5th king, Tarquinius Priscus, power in Rome passed to the Etruscans, either as a result of military conquest or as a result of gradual, peaceful penetration into the Roman community. What is unquestionable is that for about a century, Rome was under strong Etruscan domination, and they had a huge influence on various aspects of Roman life. According to tradition, beginning with Tarquinius Priscus, we see a gradual strengthening of royal authority and attempts to bypass the established procedure for electing a new king, and perhaps even to make royal power hereditary. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, in ancient sources, is portrayed as a cruel tyrant who expelled the best citizens from the city and ruled arbitrarily, ignoring the will of the people and the Senate. According to this tradition, he was eventually overthrown. From that moment, usurping power and ruling alone became mortally dangerous in Rome. Kings were now forbidden. This marked the beginning of the Roman Republic. Power passed into the hands of magistrates, officials elected, in reality approved, through the Senate and popular assemblies. The main royal prerogatives were transferred to 2 consuls, chosen from among the patricians. Later, other magistracies appeared. Quaestors, who were responsible for justice and finances, and aediles, who managed the city's infrastructure and markets. In special cases, unlimited powers could be granted to a dictator for a term of up to 6 months. Magistrates were chosen from the patrician families. Plebeians thus had limited political rights and could not hold the highest offices. Moreover, patricians owned most of the land. Plebeian debtors, who could not pay, were forced into debt bondage. Throughout the early Republic, there was constant struggle between patricians and plebeians. The plebeians demanded a fair distribution of land, the abolition of debt slavery, and the right to be elected to magistracies. Step by step, these demands were granted. The result was civil peace and the formation of a unified ruling elite made up of both patricians and wealthy plebeians. The Roman army of this era was a people's militia. Citizens were grouped into military units according to property class. The main unit became the legion, about 6,000 men divided into 30 maniples, which could act independently in battle. In the first decades of the Republic, Rome fought a difficult war with the Etruscans. In the 5th century BCE, defeating its closest neighbors, Rome established control over the lower course of the Tiber. However, Roman expansion was soon interrupted by the devastating invasion of Celtic tribes, the Gauls, who sacked Rome itself. By the end of the 4th and beginning of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had secured dominance in the Latin League, an alliance of cities founded by Latin tribes. In the Samnite Wars, Rome subdued all of central Italy and began to threaten the Greek colonies of southern Italy. The Greeks appealed for help to King Pyrrhus of Epirus, who crossed into Italy with his army. His intervention marked the beginning of the so-called Pyrrhic War. Although Pyrrhus used war elephants and defeated the Romans several times, his victories were extremely costly. Eventually, the Romans pushed his forces out of Italy. After their victory over Pyrrhus, Rome finally spread its influence over the whole of Italy. Having united Italy, Rome expanded beyond the Apennine Peninsula and encountered one of the most powerful states of the Western Mediterranean, Carthage. The wars between Rome and Carthage, known as the Punic Wars, lasted with interruptions for more than 100 years. As a result of the First Punic War, Rome acquired its first overseas territories, Corsica, Sardinia, and part of Sicily. These lands became Roman provinces. During the Second Punic War, the famous Carthaginian general Hannibal invaded Italy and inflicted a series of heavy defeats on the Romans at Lake Trasimene and in the Great Battle of Cannae. For 16 years, He threatened Rome directly, but eventually, Roman forces under Scipio Africanus transferred the war to Africa and defeated Hannibal at Zama. After the Second Punic War, Rome seized territories in Spain and became the de facto master of the Western Mediterranean. In the 2nd and early 1st centuries BCE, Rome moved into the Eastern Mediterranean. In 3 Macedonian wars, the Romans extended their power over the Balkans. After the Syrian War against the Seleucid king Antiochus III, the Hellenistic states of Asia Minor entered Rome's sphere of influence. Finally, in the 3rd Punic War, Carthage was completely destroyed. Rome had become the dominant Mediterranean power. The wars of conquest radically transformed Roman society. Victorious campaigns brought huge numbers of slaves into Italy. Slave labor gradually became the basis of the economy. Vast masses of slaves were concentrated in Italy, and slave uprisings became regular. In 138 BCE, the slaves of Sicily rose in revolt. They seized the island and even tried to create their own state. Only in 132 BCE did the Roman army finally suppress this movement. Not long after, there was a second large Sicilian slave revolt. And in 73 to 71 BCE, a massive uprising led by Spartacus shook Italy, one of the largest slave revolts in ancient history. Only with enormous effort was it crushed. The development of large latifundia, huge estates based on slave labor, ruined many small and medium peasant farms that could not compete. This social crisis brought to power reformers like Tiberius Gracchus. To solve the agrarian question, Tiberius proposed to limit the maximum amount of land one person could hold and redistribute the excess to landless Romans. Despite fierce resistance from the aristocracy, he managed to pass his law. But he was soon killed, and the reform was never fully implemented. His younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, tried to continue the reforms. He proposed distributing land in the provinces to poor Romans and introduced other measures such as subsidized grain. His initiatives sparked unrest. He too was killed. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers only deepened social tensions. The expansion of Roman power over distant provinces increased trade and monetization. Wealth flowed into Rome through generals and governors, creating a powerful class of equestrian businessmen and contractors. By the early 1st century BCE, the struggle of Italian allies for equal rights intensified. In 91 BCE, the tribune Drusus again proposed granting citizenship to the Italians. The failure of this proposal in the Senate led to the outbreak of the Social War. Although the Italian allies were ultimately defeated, the Senate was forced to compromise and extend Roman citizenship to the entire free population of the Apennine Peninsula. This turned the popular assembly into a formal body that could no longer practically represent all citizens. Against the backdrop of growing social and economic contradictions, the Roman political system fell into crisis. Institutions created for a small agrarian city-state could no longer effectively govern a huge empire. Provinces were left to governors who often exploited them ruthlessly. Heavy taxation and abuse provoked frequent uprisings. The most serious attempt to shake off Roman rule came from Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, who fought a series of wars with Rome in Asia Minor and Greece. At the same time, political life in Rome was becoming increasingly polarized. Two parties formed: the Optimates, defending the interests of the aristocracy and the authority of the Senate, and the Populares, who appealed to the people and demanded reforms. The struggle peaked with the careers of Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius rose to prominence during the wars against the Numidians, and then against the invading Germanic tribes. He carried out a crucial military reform. Instead of a property-based militia, he created a professional army. Poor citizens were now allowed to enlist. Their livelihood depended on their general. The army and its commanders became an independent political force, essentially no longer controlled by the Senate. Thanks to this reform, Rome repelled the invasions of the Cimbri and Teutones. But it also opened the way for generals to use their troops for personal power struggles. Sulla, another talented general, fought in the east. When power in Rome passed to the supporters of Marius, Sulla marched his legions on Rome, starting a civil war. He seized the city and established a dictatorship supported by political terror. His regime was the last attempt to restore the full authority of the Senate and the traditional aristocracy. Soon, a new figure came to the fore: Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. He helped crush the revolt of Spartacus, distinguished himself in the war with Mithridates, campaigned in Asia and the Caucasus, and fought Mediterranean pirates. In 60 BCE, Pompey, the wealthy politician Marcus Licinius Crassus, and the ambitious aristocrat Gaius Julius Caesar formed a political alliance, the First Triumvirate. Relying on their armies and influence, they divided control over key provinces. Caesar received the governorship of Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul, much of which was not yet under Roman rule. During the Gallic War, he conquered all of Gaul, amassed enormous wealth, and created a loyal army that was personally devoted to him. His growing power alarmed Pompey and the Senate. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the border of Italy, with his legions, in effect declaring war on the Senate. A new civil war broke out. Caesar defeated Pompey and his allies in Greece, North Africa, and Spain. In 45 BCE, he was declared father of the fatherland and dictator for life. In fact, the unlimited ruler of the Republic. The increasingly open, monarchical nature of his rule angered many senators. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius. His death led to another round of civil wars. Caesar's supporters, Mark Antony, Octavian, his adopted heir, and Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE. They ruthlessly crushed the opposition and defeated the Republican armies at Philippi. Brutus and Cassius committed suicide. After this victory, conflict arose within the triumvirate. Lepidus was sidelined. Antony, allied with Cleopatra of Egypt, clashed with Octavian. In 31 BCE, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. Egypt was annexed to Rome. In 27 BCE, Octavian became the sole ruler. 3 years later, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, the revered one. Formally, republican institutions remained, but in reality, the Roman state became a monarchy, the Roman Empire. The Republic was finished. Octavian Augustus was its first emperor, and his reign is considered the golden age of the empire. Thanks to territorial expansion, economic growth, and cultural flourishing, the era of Augustus was remembered as a time of peace and prosperity. Under Augustus, a new system of rule called the Principate was established, a combination of monarchical power with the facade of republican offices such as the Senate and magistracies. Augustus's foreign policy aimed at establishing peace in a state that had been shaken by civil wars for decades, and at strengthening Roman control in distant provinces. His policy was cautious and measured. However, Augustus did conduct some campaigns. He consolidated control over Egypt, southern Gaul, and parts of Spain, and concluded a favorable peace with Parthia. He attempted to subdue Germanic tribes, but after the catastrophic defeat in the Teutoburg forest, he decided not to cross the Rhine, and instead fortified the frontier. Under Augustus, Rome began active trade with India and diplomatic contacts with China. Internally, he carried out important reforms. Understanding how expensive armies were, he created a permanent professional army, instead of repeatedly raising and disbanding legions. After the civil wars, dozens of legions remained. Augustus reduced their number to about 28 well-equipped professional units. They were stationed in the provinces, and their commanders were appointed by the emperor himself. The term of service was set at 20 years, with soldiers receiving pay and land grants. He also created the famous Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal elite troops. In social policy, Augustus sought the support of all classes. He raised the property qualifications for senators and emphasized their prestige, but at the same time used free grain distributions and spectacular games to win over the urban masses. On his and his family's funds, large-scale construction unfolded in Rome. Forums, the altar of peace, temples, restoration of aqueducts and sewers, public baths, and the first public library. Augustus said that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He paid great attention to the supply of Rome with grain and water, building granaries and improving aqueducts. Augustus carefully controlled the granting of Roman citizenship and encouraged Romans to see themselves as natural rulers of the world. He tried to draw a sharp line between Romans and non-Romans, divide and rule. He passed laws encouraging marriage and childbirth. People who ignored these norms lost inheritance and office rights, while those with 3 or more children received privileges. He limited the freeing of slaves, passed a law against adultery, restored temples, and tried to revive traditional morals. His flexible policy suited both senators and the common people. His reign also became the golden age of Roman culture. With imperial patronage flourished literature, science, and art. The works of Virgil, Horace, Ovid, the historian Livy, the geographer Strabo, and the architect Vitruvius. Faced with a shortage of precious metals, Augustus carried out a major monetary reform. He stabilized the gold aureus and standardized the imperial coinage system, making taxes and payments more predictable across the vast territory of the empire. He introduced a new tax system and modernized the road network, which bound provinces more tightly to the capital. After Augustus's death, the question of succession arose. Later power would be passed from father to son, or adopted heir. But at that time, there was no clear rule. Augustus tried to prepare successors during his lifetime. His early candidates, Marcellus and Agrippa, died. He then adopted the sons of his wife, Livia, from her first marriage. One of them, Tiberius, became his heir. In the first years of his reign, Tiberius ruled in agreement with the Senate. He formally granted it the right to choose magistrates, though in practice he suggested suitable candidates himself. Tiberius was frugal and cut expenditures on games and buildings. At the same time, he actively used an old law on treason and insult to authority as a tool of political struggle. Accusations under this law often ended in confiscations and executions. He also expelled the Jews from Rome. The Praetorian Guard was concentrated in the capital, and its prefects gained enormous influence. Over time, Tiberius became reclusive and suspicious. He left Rome for the island of Capri, from where he ruled through letters, reading denunciations, and demanding punishments. Roman society plunged into an atmosphere of fear and informers. In 37 CE, the aged emperor fell ill and died. Ancient authors colorfully describe his death. They claim that he briefly revived from a coma after the Praetorian Guard had already sworn loyalty to his successor Gaius, and was then smothered by order of the new regime. Whatever the exact details, Tiberius was gone, and Gaius Julius Caesar, Germanicus, better known by his childhood nickname Caligula, Little Boot, became emperor. As a child, he had accompanied his father Germanicus in the army and wore miniature soldier's boots, hence the name. The Roman people greeted the young emperor with joy. They remembered his popular father and were tired of Tiberius's severity. At first, according to the sources, Caligula behaved like a good ruler. He proclaimed amnesty, abolished the law on treason in its harshest form, reduced some taxes, and sponsored construction of aqueducts, roads, and buildings. He respected the Senate formally and allowed the people to elect some magistrates again. He arranged games and distributions, but soon he fell seriously ill, and many ancient authors believed that his mind was affected. Some say he was poisoned by his mistress and future wife, Caesonia, with a love potion. Others suggest he suffered from some severe illness. After his recovery, Caligula's behavior turned monstrous, at least as Roman writers describe it. His debauchery and cruelty became legendary. At feasts, they say, he could take another man's wife to his bedroom and then return to describe her merits and flaws in bed. He could snatch a bride from a groom right at the wedding, or even the groom from the bride. He lavished wealth on endless entertainment, quickly exhausting the treasury. To refill it, he sharply increased taxes and demanded to be mentioned in people's wills. He humiliated senators, mocked prominent men, and even called his own soldiers obscene names. One of the officers he abused was Cassius Chaerea, a strict veteran whom Caligula jokingly gave passwords like Venus and Love. Chaerea became one of the leaders of the conspiracy. Caligula ignored the warning of an oracle to beware of Cassius, ordering the execution of another man with the same name instead. Ultimately, officers of the Praetorian Guard assassinated him in a passage under the palace as he was leaving the theater. The conspirators did not know what to do next. While the Senate debated the possibility of restoring the Republic, a soldier found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain. The Praetorians proclaimed him emperor. Claudius was a scholar who had written histories of the Etruscans, Carthaginians, and Romans. Despite his physical awkwardness, he proved an effective ruler. He created a permanent imperial bureaucracy. A chancery was formed. Some officials dealt with revenues, others with petitions, others drafted edicts. He issued laws mitigating some punishments and widely granted Roman citizenship to provincials, especially for loyal service. Under Claudius, Britain was finally conquered and turned into a province. His private life was stormy. His wife, Messalina, at least in the portrait painted by ancient authors, was notorious for her promiscuity and intrigues. Eventually, she became involved in a plot against him. It was uncovered, and she was executed. 3 months later, Claudius married Agrippina the Younger, sister of Caligula. She had a son from a previous marriage, Nero. Agrippina promoted her son, eliminating potential rivals, and persuaded Claudius to adopt him. Nero married Claudius's daughter Octavia and became heir. According to ancient tradition, when Claudius began to reconsider this arrangement, Agrippina poisoned him. Nero, still very young, ascended the throne. At first, he ruled under the influence of his mother and the philosopher Seneca. The early years of his reign are described as relatively mild. But tensions grew. Agrippina interfered in his private life, forcing him to part with his beloved and proposing brides he did not want. Nero clashed with her and several times tried to have her killed. He arranged a collapsing ceiling, a sabotaged ship, and poison, but she survived. Eventually, he had her murdered. Seneca, whose wise counsel limited Nero's excesses, was also forced to commit suicide. Free from these constraints, Nero increasingly indulged his passions. He reduced some taxes, cut military spending, and invested in games and performances. He loved theater and considered himself a poet, singer, and actor. Courtiers were afraid to criticize him and praised his mediocre talents. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, rumors spread that Nero himself had ordered the city burned to free space for his new palace. Ancient sources disagree, but Nero certainly used the disaster for his grand building projects. Blame for the fire he shifted onto the Christians, subjecting them to brutal persecutions. Many were executed in the arena. Rebuilding the city required enormous funds. Combined with plagues and economic difficulties, this led to new taxes and confiscations. Discontent grew. Conspiracies arose, such as the Pisonian conspiracy, which Nero suppressed with mass executions. Eventually, revolts broke out in the provinces and even in the legions. Commanders were proclaimed emperors by their troops. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy. Abandoned by everyone, he fled, and with the help of a servant, committed suicide. He was the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. His death plunged the empire into a year of chaos, the year of the 4 emperors. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius rapidly replaced each other. In the end, the governor of the eastern provinces, Vespasian, was proclaimed emperor. Vespasian, an experienced general, restored order and founded the Flavian dynasty. He re-established unity, crushed revolts, particularly in Judea, and strengthened discipline in the army. He restored finances with new taxes, including a tax on public latrines, which prompted his famous phrase, "Money does not stink." Under Vespasian, construction of the great Flavian amphitheater began. The Colosseum. His son Titus completed the Colosseum and celebrated its opening with grand games. His short reign was marked by disasters. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Stabia, and a severe epidemic struck the empire. Titus tried to alleviate the suffering and became known as a benevolent ruler, but he soon died. His brother Domitian succeeded him. Domitian quickly clashed with the Senate, emphasized his autocratic power, and sought military glory. His costly spectacles and building projects drained the treasury. He issued an unpopular edict ordering vineyards to be cut down to make room for grain fields, hoping to reduce dependence on imported grain. In the conditions of Italy, this policy was economically senseless and caused resentment. Campaigns against the Dacians and Sarmatians were inconclusive, and he had to agree to pay annual tribute to the Dacian king Decebalus. In 96 CE, Domitian was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. After his death, the Senate chose the elderly Nerva as emperor. He had to adopt the popular General Trajan to secure the support of the army. Thus began the era of the adoptive emperors. Trajan, the first emperor from the provinces, Spain, combined respect for the Senate with strong personal authority. He was praised as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. He cared about laws and public welfare and created the Alimenta, a fund to support poor but freeborn children. He built new forums, markets, and roads. In foreign policy, Trajan sought to restore Rome's military might. He waged tough but successful wars against Dacia, annexing it as a province and bringing enormous booty to Rome. Then he campaigned against Parthia, capturing Armenia and parts of Mesopotamia. During his return, he fell ill and died in 117 CE. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. His column in Rome still commemorates his victories. After Trajan, his relative Hadrian became emperor. He reversed the policy of expansion and moved to strategic defense. He abandoned some eastern conquests and focused on strengthening borders, building grand lines of fortifications, including Hadrian's Wall in Britain. He maintained peace largely by diplomacy and cultural influence, traveling widely through the provinces and supporting cities. One of his architectural legacies is the rebuilt Pantheon in Rome, a unique temple to all the gods with an enormous concrete dome. Hadrian's successor, Antoninus Pius, presided over a relatively peaceful and prosperous era. Provinces flourished, Roman law developed, and the principle of presumption of innocence was formulated more clearly. He continued the policy of granting citizenship and integrating provincial elites. After Antoninus came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher on the throne, a Stoic whose meditations became a classic of world philosophy. Despite his personal love of peace, his reign was marked by constant wars against Parthia in the east and Germanic tribes along the Danube. He was merciful to personal enemies, but harsh toward Christians, whom he saw as fanatical and socially disruptive. Persecutions continued. Christians were torn apart by beasts in the Colosseum. In 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius died during a plague that ravaged the army. His son Commodus became emperor, ending the era of the 5 good emperors. Commodus cared more about personal luxury than state affairs. He handed power to favorites, especially the freedman Cleander, who sold high offices and embezzled funds. Corruption and arbitrariness flourished. Commodus fancied himself a new Hercules, had himself portrayed in the hero's lion skin, and even appeared in the arena as a gladiator, fighting in rigged contests. Ancient authors describe him delighting in theatrical displays of strength, while the empire's institutions decayed. Hatred for him united all layers of society. In a conspiracy involving his mistress Marcia, senators and officers, he was strangled by the wrestler Narcissus. His death ended the Antonine dynasty. The empire plunged into a new period of civil wars. Eventually, Septimius Severus, a general from the Balkans and North Africa, seized power and founded the Severan dynasty. His regime was a military bureaucratic monarchy. The Senate lost influence, many senators were executed, and power rested on the army and the imperial chancery. Severus waged successful campaigns against Parthia, turning Mesopotamia into a province. His son Caracalla shared power with his brother Geta, but soon murdered him and many of his supporters. Facing financial difficulties, Caracalla issued an edict granting Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, largely to expand the tax base. He increased soldiers' pay, which made him popular with the army, but hated by the elites. He was eventually killed by the Praetorian prefect Macrinus, who briefly became emperor before being overthrown. After him came the eccentric adolescent emperor Elagabalus, a Syrian high priest of the sun god. If we believe Roman authors, he shocked society with religious innovations and sexual scandals. The army murdered him and elevated his relative Alexander Severus. Alexander tried to restore cooperation with the Senate, but real power remained with the army. Any attempt to cut military spending provoked mutiny. His attempts to buy peace from the Germanic tribes with money outraged the soldiers. In a military revolt, he and his mother were killed. The end of the Severan dynasty opened the era of the crisis of the 3rd century, a deep social, political, and military crisis. For roughly 33 years, around 25 to 30 emperors were proclaimed. Most died violent deaths. The empire fragmented, cities declined, trade collapsed, and frontiers were breached by Goths, Alemanni, Franks, Persians, and others. Breakaway states, such as the Gallic Empire and the Palmyrene Kingdom, appeared. Some emperors, like Gallienus and Aurelian, carried out partial reforms and managed to restore unity temporarily, beat back invasions, and strengthen defenses. Aurelian built a new defensive wall around Rome and reconquered Palmyra and the Gallic Empire. Finally, in 284 CE, the Illyrian officer Diocletian became emperor. His accession marks the transition from the principate to the dominate, an openly autocratic monarchy. Old republican institutions became mere decoration. The emperor was now addressed as Dominus, Lord, and Augustus, and his court adopted Eastern ceremonial. Diocletian divided the empire into 4 parts, establishing the Tetrarchy, rule by 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior co-emperors, Caesars. He strengthened administration, reformed the army, and tried to stabilize the economy. He launched the last and harshest persecutions of Christians, ordering churches closed and scriptures burned. Despite his reforms, the overall economic situation improved only temporarily. The imperial market was weakened, agriculture declined, banditry grew, and local separatism increased. Remarkably, Diocletian voluntarily abdicated and retired to his palace in Dalmatia. When urged to return to power, he allegedly pointed to his cabbages and replied that if his former colleagues saw how beautifully they grew, they would not ask him to leave his garden. After a series of struggles, Constantine emerged victorious. He at first remained a pagan, but understood the growing strength of Christianity and its unifying potential. Constantine became the first emperor to openly favor Christianity. In 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance. Over time, Christianity moved toward the status of state religion. The city of Rome ceased to be the imperial residence. In an age of constant external threats, the ruler had to be closer to the frontiers. Constantine decided to found a new capital in the east, on the site of the Greek city of Byzantium, later renamed Constantinople. Thus, he transformed the empire administratively, ideologically, and religiously. After Constantine, his successors struggled to maintain unity, but centrifugal forces grew. In 395, Emperor Theodosius I, the last ruler of a united empire, divided it between his sons into the Western and Eastern Roman empires. The eastern half, richer and better defended, survived. The western half weakened. In the 4th and 5th centuries, the Great Migration of Peoples began. The Huns moved west from the steppes of Central Asia, pushing Germanic and other tribes ahead of them, like a domino effect. Climate change likely contributed, driving nomadic peoples to seek new lands. Many of these tribes sought refuge or new territories within the Roman frontiers. Theodosius allowed the Goths to settle as federates within the empire. Over time, barbarian federate troops became essential to Roman defense and a major political factor. The Western Empire, weakened by internal strife and economic decline, could not resist. In the early 5th century, the Visigoths repeatedly besieged Rome. To avoid destruction, the Romans paid tribute twice. In 410, refusing to pay again, they faced famine and despair. Slaves opened the gates, and for the first time in 800 years, Rome was taken by enemy forces. The city was looted, but the Visigothic king Alaric spared Christians and those who took refuge in churches. He himself was an Arian Christian. Later came the Huns under Attila. In 451, the Roman general Aetius, allied with Visigoths and other tribes, defeated them at the Catalaunian plains. The next year, Attila invaded Italy, but his sudden death and the breakup of his confederation saved Rome. Aetius, the last of the Romans, was murdered by Emperor Valentinian III in a palace intrigue. A few years later, the Vandals sacked Rome, plundering it so thoroughly that their name became a synonym for destructive cruelty: vandalism. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire controlled little more than Italy. Emperors became puppets in the hands of barbarian generals. The last rulers tried to preserve at least the city's monuments and fragments of authority, but to no avail. In 476, the Germanic commander Odoacer deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus, sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Emperor Zeno, and declared himself King of Italy. Zeno granted him the title of patrician and nominal Roman governor, but in reality, Odoacer ruled independently. Modern historians usually take 476 as the conventional date marking the end of the Western Roman Empire and the transition from antiquity to the Middle Ages. But contemporaries did not perceive it as a sudden fall of Rome. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called Byzantium, continued to see itself as the Roman Empire and hoped to restore its former territories. Scholars still debate the reasons for Rome's fall. Among the factors mentioned are political instability and rapid turnover of emperors. increasing pressure of barbarian peoples on the frontiers, economic decline, and climate change. On the ruins of the Western Roman Empire, barbarian kingdoms arose, Visigothic, Frankish, Vandal, and others, which later evolved into many of today's European states. The Roman civilization left an immense legacy. Roman law, the Latin language, monumental architecture, roads, taxation systems, urban administration, and political ideas. It laid the foundations for the cultural and political development of Europe and continues to influence the modern world. Perhaps no other civilization has left such a rich heritage to its descendants. Rome still amazes us. How did they build those aqueducts? Make such political decisions? Create such a system of governance? The Middle Ages would later be called dark compared to the brilliance of the Roman Golden Age. The cultural rebirth of Europe, the Renaissance, would look back precisely to Rome and Greece as the model of a golden age of humanity in the eyes of posterity. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss new releases. Share your impressions in the comments.